My parents refused to help me with a single dollar for college. But when my sister wanted a house, they bought it for her. I made sure they'll never benefit from me again. My name is Sarah, and this is about how my parents' blatant favoritism toward my younger sister Madison cost them everything they thought they could count on from me. Growing up in suburban Chicago, I was always the responsible one. While Madison, who was 3 years younger, was out partying and getting into trouble during her own high school years, I maintained a 4.0 GPA, volunteered at the local animal shelter, and worked part-time at a grocery store to save money for college. My parents, Robert and Linda, always praised me for being so mature and self-sufficient, but I realize now that was just their way of justifying treating me like I didn't need their support. When senior year came around in 2010, I had my heart set on Northwestern University. I'd been accepted into their pre-med program, something I dreamed about since I was 12 years old. The total cost would be about $60,000 per year, and even with the partial scholarship I'd earned, I'd still need significant help. I approached my parents with a detailed financial plan, showing them exactly how much I needed and how I planned to pay them back after medical school. "Sarah, honey," my father said, not even looking up from his newspaper, "you're smart enough to figure this out on your own. Take out student loans like everyone else. It'll teach you the value of money." My mother nodded in agreement. "Besides, we need to be careful with our finances. Your father's business isn't doing as well as it used to be." This was complete nonsense. Dad owned 3 successful auto repair shops, and Mom worked as a real estate agent in one of the wealthiest suburbs in the area. They drove luxury cars, took annual European vacations, and had just finished remodeling their kitchen for the 3rd time in 10 years. But I believed them. I was 18 and naive enough to think they were telling me the truth about their financial situation. So I took out massive student loans. I worked 3 jobs during college, tutoring, waiting tables, and cleaning office buildings at night. I lived on ramen noodles and generic brand everything. While my classmates enjoyed typical college experiences, I was constantly stressed about money. I couldn't afford to join clubs, go on spring break trips, or even buy textbooks new. Everything was used, borrowed, or photocopied. The worst part was watching my parents' social media posts during this time. They were constantly traveling, eating at expensive restaurants, and buying new things for their house. But whenever I called home struggling with finances, they'd give me lectures about building character and learning independence. I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in biochemistry and got accepted to several medical schools. Once again, I approached my parents for help, this time with an even more detailed plan showing my future earning potential as a physician. Once again, they refused. "You've made it this far on your own," Mom said. "We have faith you can handle medical school too." Medical school was even worse financially. The loans piled up, and I was working as a medical scribe and research assistant just to afford basic living expenses. By the time I graduated medical school, I was $350,000 in debt. But I'd done it. I'd become a doctor without a single dollar from my parents. During my residency in emergency medicine, I was making $55,000 a year while working 80-hour weeks. It was brutal, but I was finally earning money as a physician, even if most of it went to loan payments. I was proud of what I'd accomplished, despite getting no help from my parents. The residency years were some of the most challenging of my life. I was essentially a student again, but this time I was responsible for actual patients' lives while barely making enough to cover my basic expenses and loan payments. I lived in a tiny studio apartment in a questionable neighborhood because it was all I could afford. My furniture consisted of a futon, a folding table, and plastic lawn chairs I'd bought at a discount store. My typical day started at 5 a.m. and ended well past midnight. I'd grab coffee and whatever free food was available at the hospital, often going 12 hours between meals. My social life was non-existent, not that I could have afforded to go out anyway. While my medical school classmates who had family support were able to live in decent apartments and occasionally enjoy themselves, I was counting every penny. The emotional toll was just as difficult as the financial strain. I was dealing with life and death situations daily, car accident victims, heart attacks, overdoses, domestic violence cases. The trauma of seeing so much human suffering while being exhausted and financially stressed was overwhelming. I started seeing a therapist at the hospital's employee assistance program, one of the few benefits that was actually free. During this time, my parents would occasionally call to check in, but our conversations were always superficial. They'd ask how work was going, and I'd give generic positive responses because I knew they didn't really want to hear about my struggles. When they'd mention their latest vacation or home improvement project, I'd feel a familiar stab of resentment, but I'd learned to keep those feelings to myself. The few times I did try to share what I was going through, the responses were predictably dismissive. When I mentioned during one phone call that I was living on peanut butter sandwiches and instant ramen, Dad said, "Well, you're almost done with residency. It's just temporary." When I told Mom I was working so many hours that I barely had time to do laundry, she said, "That's just part of paying your dues as a doctor." They never offered to help, not even in small ways. They never sent care packages or offered to help with groceries during visits. They never acknowledged that my financial situation was difficult or that they had the means to make it easier. It was as if they completely compartmentalized my struggles and convinced themselves that this was somehow good for me. Meanwhile, Madison was coasting through her senior year of high school with no pressure to figure out her future. She'd been accepted to the local community college but was also considering taking a gap year to find herself. My parents were completely supportive of whatever she wanted to do, assuring her there was no rush to make decisions. The contrast was stark. While I was pushing myself to the point of exhaustion to build a career in medicine, Madison was being encouraged to take her time and explore her options. While I was living on rice and beans, she was getting money for shopping trips and social activities. The double standard was so obvious it was almost comical, except it wasn't funny to me at all. One particular incident during my second year of residency crystallized just how differently my parents viewed Madison and me. I'd been working in the trauma unit for 6 months and had seen things that would haunt me for years: children injured in accidents, victims of violent crimes, families destroyed by sudden loss. The emotional weight of it all had been building up, and one night after a particularly difficult shift, I called home in tears. I'd just finished working on a teenage boy who'd been hit by a drunk driver. Despite our best efforts, we couldn't save him. His parents' grief was devastating to witness, and something about the whole situation had broken through my professional defenses. I was sobbing as I told my mother about it, explaining how difficult it was to deal with these tragedies while being so exhausted and isolated. "Honey," Mom said in a tone that was meant to be comforting but came across as condescending, "this is just part of being a doctor. You knew it would be challenging when you chose this path." "I know it's challenging," I said through my tears. "But I'm doing it completely alone. I have no support system, no financial cushion, nothing. I'm barely holding it together." "Sarah, you're stronger than you think. You've always been so capable of handling things on your own." There it was again, the narrative that I was somehow naturally equipped to handle everything alone, as if being forced into independence had been a gift rather than an abandonment. 2 days later, Madison called our parents crying because she'd gotten a C+ on a biology exam that she'd barely studied for. Within an hour, Dad was on his way to her apartment with her favorite takeout food and a care package full of snacks and comfort items. Mom spent over an hour on the phone with her, reassuring her that one bad grade didn't matter and that she was proud of her for trying her best. When I heard about this incident, because of course Madison posted about it on social media with captions about having the most supportive parents ever, I felt a level of anger I'd never experienced before. I had called home in genuine crisis, dealing with real trauma and financial hardship, and gotten a lecture about being strong. Madison had gotten a mediocre grade on an exam and received immediate emotional and material support. That's when I started to understand that my parents' treatment of us wasn't just favoritism, it was a fundamental difference in how they viewed us as people. They saw me as someone who didn't need or deserve support, and Madison as someone who required constant nurturing and assistance. They constructed entire narratives around our personalities to justify this difference, and nothing I said or did would change their minds. I stopped calling home as frequently after that. When they'd reach out to me, I'd keep the conversations brief and surface level. I focused entirely on my work and my future, knowing that I was truly on my own in every meaningful way. The remainder of my residency passed in a blur of 18-hour shifts, cafeteria coffee, and loan payment reminders. I watched my debt continue to grow due to capitalized interest, even as I was making payments. The psychological impact of seeing that number increase month after month, despite my best efforts, was crushing. I calculated once that I was paying over $2,000 per month in interest alone. By the time I finished residency, I felt like I'd aged a decade in 3 years. I was professionally competent and had received excellent evaluations, but I was emotionally exhausted and financially devastated. The attending position I'd secured would finally provide a real salary, but I knew it would take years to dig out of the hole I was in. Then Madison graduated high school. My sister had always been the golden child. She was naturally charismatic and outgoing, while I was more reserved and studious. She played volleyball in high school but wasn't particularly talented. Her grades were mediocre at best. She had no clear career goals and spent most of her time shopping and hanging out with friends. Madison decided she wanted to go to a local community college to study something in business, though she couldn't articulate what exactly that meant. The total cost would be maybe $8,000 per year. Not only did my parents pay for her entire education without her even asking, they also gave her a brand new Honda Civic for graduation and paid for a luxury apartment near campus. "We want Madison to focus on her studies without worrying about work," Dad explained when I questioned the obvious double standard. I was furious, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they'd learned from their mistakes with me. Maybe they realized how difficult it had been for me and wanted to do better with Madison. I swallowed my anger and tried to maintain a relationship with my family. Madison breezed through community college in 3 years, changing her major twice. She graduated with an associate's degree in general business studies and no real career prospects. Instead of pushing her to find a job, my parents supported her while she figured things out. This figuring out phase lasted 2 years and consisted mainly of working part-time at a boutique clothing store while living in the apartment my parents paid for. Meanwhile, I finished my residency and got hired as an attending physician at a major trauma center. My starting salary was $280,000, and for the first time in my adult life, I could actually afford to live comfortably while making significant loan payments. I bought a modest condo and a reliable used car. I was finally getting my financial life in order. When Madison turned 25, she announced she was ready to settle down. She'd been dating her high school boyfriend Jake on and off for years. Jake worked at a construction company and made decent money, but nothing spectacular. Madison had this romanticized idea of being a young housewife and started pressuring Jake to propose. The engagement announcement came via a Facebook post featuring Madison's ring, a 2-carat diamond that Jake definitely couldn't have afforded on his salary. When I called to congratulate them, Madison gushed about how Jake had saved up for months to buy it. I later learned from Dad's offhand comment during a family dinner that he'd helped Jake out with a ring because he wanted Madison to have something special. Even Jake's proposal had been subsidized by my parents. The wedding planning process was elaborate and expensive. Madison wanted everything to be perfect: the venue, the dress, the flowers, the photography. She spent months visiting vendors and creating Pinterest boards full of ideas for her dream wedding. Every time she found something she loved but couldn't afford, my parents stepped in to make it happen. "We only get to do this once," Mom would say whenever I questioned the expense of some wedding detail. "Madison deserves to have the wedding she's always dreamed of." I wondered if they'd ever considered that I might want to get married someday too, and whether they'd be equally generous with my hypothetical wedding expenses. Given their track record, I doubted it. The dress shopping alone was an event that lasted several weekends. Madison wanted to try on gowns at the most expensive bridal boutiques in Chicago, with Mom and our Aunt Patricia along as her entourage. They made a whole weekend of it, staying at a luxury hotel and eating at expensive restaurants between appointments. The dress Madison finally chose cost $3,500, not including alterations. For comparison, I'd bought my medical school graduation dress at Target for $29. The wedding venue was a country club that charged $150 per person for dinner, not including drinks, flowers, or entertainment. With 200 guests, the catering alone was $30,000. Then there was the DJ, the photographer, the videographer, the flowers, the transportation, and dozens of other expenses that added up quickly. I offered to help pay for something, anything, to contribute to Madison's wedding. My parents dismissed the offer immediately. "Don't be silly, Sarah," Dad said. "You're dealing with your student loans. We can handle Madison's wedding." Once again, my financial struggles were used as a reason to exclude me from family generosity, rather than as a reason to include me in it. Jake's family contributed what they could, but they were solidly middle-class people who didn't have the resources my parents did. Jake's father was a factory worker, and his mother was a school secretary. They paid for the rehearsal dinner at a chain restaurant and gave the couple $5,000 as a wedding gift, which represented a significant sacrifice for them. My parents, meanwhile, spared no expense. They hired a wedding planner to coordinate everything, arranged for a luxury car service to transport the wedding party, and booked the honeymoon suite at a resort in Maui for Madison and Jake's week-long honeymoon. Jake did propose, and they planned a wedding for the following year. My parents paid for the entire thing, a $45,000 affair at a country club with 200 guests. They paid for Madison's dress, the flowers, the catering, the photographer, everything. They even paid for the honeymoon to Hawaii. The wedding itself was beautiful, I'll give them that. Madison looked stunning, Jake was clearly in love, and everyone had a wonderful time. I was happy for my sister, genuinely happy. She deserved to be loved and celebrated. But sitting at the reception, watching my parents beam with pride as they danced with Madison and gave heartfelt speeches about their little girl, I couldn't help but feel invisible. During the reception, several family friends and relatives made comments to me about how generous my parents were, How lucky Madison was to have such supportive parents, and how wonderful it was that they could provide such a beautiful wedding for their daughter. Each comment felt like a small knife twist, reminding me of everything I'd never received. My Uncle Tom, Dad's business partner, pulled me aside during the reception. "Your parents really went all out for this wedding," he said, gesturing around the elegantly decorated ballroom. "They must be so proud. I bet they're already planning to do the same for you when your time comes." I smiled politely and made some noncommittal response, but inside I was screaming. When my time came, I was 28 years old, working 60-hour weeks as an attending physician, and still paying off massive student loans. Even if I met someone and got engaged tomorrow, I wouldn't be able to afford a wedding like this for years, if ever. And based on my parents' track record, I knew I'd be planning and paying for my own wedding when the time came. The speeches during the reception were particularly difficult to endure. Dad gave a long, emotional toast about how proud he was of Madison, how she'd grown into a beautiful young woman, and how excited he was to welcome Jake into the family. Mom's speech was about Madison's kindness, her beauty, and her bright future. No one mentioned the fact that Madison had been financially supported by our parents for her entire adult life, or that this beautiful wedding was just the latest in a long series of generous gifts. The narrative was that Madison was this wonderful, deserving young woman who had earned all of this support through her inherent goodness. I gave a brief speech as Madison's maid of honor, focusing on childhood memories and wishing the couple happiness. I kept my tone light and positive, but I couldn't help feeling like a fraud standing there pretending everything was fine. After the reception, as I was helping clean up, I overheard Mom talking to one of her friends about the wedding expenses. "It was worth every penny," Mom was saying. "Madison has been looking forward to her wedding day since she was a little girl. Robert and I wanted to make sure she had everything she dreamed of." "You're such wonderful parents," the friend replied. "Madison is so lucky to have you." "We just want our girls to be happy," Mom said, glancing in my direction. "Sarah's always been so independent, so focused on her career. But Madison needed this. She needed to know we were behind her as she starts this new chapter." There it was again, the idea that I didn't need support because I was independent, while Madison deserved support because she needed it. The fact that my independence had been forced on me, while Madison's dependence had been enabled, seemed lost on everyone. I attended the wedding and smiled through gritted teeth as I watched my parents shower Madison with everything I'd never received. But the real slap in the face was still coming. 6 months after the wedding, Madison and Jake decided they wanted to buy a house. They'd been living in a rental apartment and wanted to start a family. The problem was they had no savings and couldn't qualify for a mortgage on their combined income of about $65,000 per year. My parents' solution? They bought Madison and Jake a house. Not a small starter home. A beautiful 4-bedroom colonial in a desirable neighborhood, worth $420,000. They put it entirely in Madison and Jake's names, calling it an early inheritance and an investment in their future. When I found out about this, I drove to my parents' house and confronted them directly. "You bought Madison a house?" I said, not even bothering with pleasantries when Mom opened the door. "Sarah, honey, come in. Let's talk about this calmly." "Calmly?" I was shaking with rage. "You refused to help me with a single dollar for college or medical school. I've been paying off student loans for 8 years while working myself to death. And you just bought my sister a house?" Dad joined us in the living room, looking uncomfortable. "Madison's situation is different. She and Jake are starting a family. They need stability. I needed stability too. I needed support when I was living on ramen noodles and working 3 jobs just to get through college." "You were always so independent," Mom said. "We knew you'd figure it out. Madison needs more help. Madison needs more help because you've never required her to be independent. You've enabled her dependency her entire life." The argument went on for an hour. They kept insisting that they'd made the right decisions, that I was successful because of the struggles I'd endured, and that Madison needed their support more than I ever had. They couldn't see, or refused to acknowledge, the blatant unfairness of their treatment. I left that day knowing that my relationship with my parents had fundamentally changed. But I didn't realize yet how much worse it would get. Over the next year, Madison and Jake settled into their new house. Madison got pregnant and quit her job at the boutique, while Jake continued working construction. My parents were thrilled about becoming grandparents and spent thousands of dollars setting up the nursery and buying baby supplies. Meanwhile, I was working 60-hour weeks as an ER doctor, dealing with life and death situations daily, and still making substantial loan payments each month. I'd been promoted to a senior attending position with a salary increase to $320,000, but between taxes and loan payments, I wasn't living as luxuriously as my income might suggest. When Madison's baby was born, a healthy boy they named Connor. My parents were over the moon. They immediately started talking about college funds and future investments for their grandson. The irony wasn't lost on me. That's when things took an interesting turn. During Connor's first Christmas, the whole family gathered at my parents' house. Madison and Jake were struggling financially despite not having housing costs. Jake's construction work was seasonal, and Madison wasn't working at all. They were asking my parents for money constantly: grocery money, car payment money, money for Connor's necessities. My parents were happy to oblige, but I could see the strain starting to show. Dad's business was actually beginning to struggle due to increased competition from chain auto repair shops. Mom's real estate sales had slowed down significantly due to market changes. They were still comfortable, but they weren't as flush with cash as they'd been a few years earlier. During dinner, Dad made a comment that would change everything. "Sarah," he said, "you're doing so well now with your doctor's salary. It would mean a lot to your mother and me if you could help contribute to Connor's college fund. We want to make sure he has opportunities." I stared at him in disbelief. "You want me to contribute to Connor's college fund?" "Well, yes. You're his aunt, and you make good money now. Family should help family." I laughed, actually laughed out loud. Family should help family? That's rich, coming from you. The room went silent. Madison looked confused, and Jake seemed uncomfortable. "Sarah, there's no need to be rude," Mom said. "Rude? You want to talk about rude? How about refusing to help your daughter with college tuition while she worked 3 jobs and lived on ramen? How about buying your other daughter a house while the first one struggles with student loans? And now you want me to contribute to Connor's college fund?" Dad's face reddened. "That's different. You didn't need our help. You were capable of handling things yourself. I wasn't capable, Dad. I was desperate. I was stressed constantly about money. I worked myself into the ground just to survive. But you were too busy spending money on European vacations to care." The argument that followed was worse than the previous one. Madison started crying, saying I was ruining Christmas and being jealous of her happiness. Jake tried to defend his wife while simultaneously looking embarrassed about their financial dependence on my parents. My parents insisted they'd done nothing wrong and that I was being unreasonable. I left that Christmas dinner with a plan forming in my mind. If my parents thought family should help family, I was going to show them exactly what that meant. Over the next few months, I started making changes to my life and my relationship with my family. First, I stopped attending family gatherings. When my parents called to ask why I wasn't coming to Sunday dinners anymore, I told them I was too busy with work. When they invited me to Connor's first birthday party, I sent a gift but didn't attend. My parents were confused by my behavior, but they assumed I was just going through a phase. They had no idea what was coming. Meanwhile, I was making excellent progress on my student loans thanks to my high salary and disciplined spending habits. I'd also started investing aggressively and had built up a substantial emergency fund. I was finally in a position where I could start thinking about major purchases and long-term financial goals. In June, I got an unexpected call from Dad. "Sarah, honey, I need to talk to you about something important." "What's up, Dad?" "Well, you know how business has been slow lately. I'm having some cash flow problems, and I was wondering if you might be able to help me out with a loan. Just temporary, until things pick up." I almost smiled. "How much are we talking about?" "Maybe $25,000? I know it's a lot, but I'm in a real bind here. The bank is being difficult about extending my credit line." $25,000? Less than half of what I'd needed for just 1 year of college. "Dad, that's a lot of money. I'll need to think about it." Of course. But if you could let me know soon, that would be great. I've got payroll coming up, and I need to cover some supplier payments." I told him I'd get back to him within a week. Then I spent that week crafting my response carefully. When I called him back, my voice was steady and calm. "Dad, I've thought about your request for a loan." "Oh good, Sarah. I really appreciate you considering it. I've decided not to lend you the money." Silence on the other end of the line. "I'm sorry, what?" I said no. "I won't be lending you $25,000. "Sarah, I don't understand. You make good money now. This would really help me out." "You're right, Dad. I do make good money now. I make good money because I worked my ass off through college and medical school with no help from you. I make good money because I lived like a pauper for 10 years while building my career." "Sarah, that's not fair. What's not fair is asking me for money when you refused to help me when I desperately needed it. What's not fair is buying Madison a house while I struggled with student loans. What's not fair is expecting me to contribute to Connor's college fund when you wouldn't contribute to mine. That's completely different. You're right. It is different. When I needed help, I was your daughter asking for support to build a career that would benefit everyone in the long run. You're a grown man who owns 3 businesses asking for a bailout because you made poor financial decisions. The conversation escalated quickly from there. Dad accused me of being spiteful and selfish. I reminded him of every instance of their favoritism toward Madison. He hung up on me. 2 days later, Mom called. Sarah, your father told me about your conversation. I think you're being unreasonable. Mom, I'm being realistic. You taught me that family members should be independent and figure things out on their own. I'm just applying the same lesson you taught me. This is different. Your father is going through a rough patch. And I went through a rough patch for 8 years. Did you care then? Mom tried a different approach. What if we paid you back with interest? We could make it a formal loan with payment terms. The same way I would have paid you back for college? With interest and payment terms? The same way I offered to do that and you refused? She didn't have an answer for that. Over the next month, Dad's financial situation deteriorated. He had to let go of several employees and was struggling to keep all 3 shops operational. He approached me 2 more times for loans, and I refused both times. Then Madison called. Sarah, what's wrong with you? Mom and Dad are really struggling, and you won't help them. Madison, they bought you a $420,000 house. Maybe you could help them. That's different. That was a gift. And Jake and I don't have that kind of money. Right. It was a gift that I never received. And you don't have that kind of money because you've never been required to earn it yourself. You're being so selfish. They're our parents. They're your parents when you need money and my parents when they need money. Funny how that works. Madison hung up on me too. By the fall, Dad had to close one of his 3 shops. The family was in full crisis mode, and I was the villain for refusing to help. They'd enlisted other family members to call me and try to guilt me into changing my mind. My Aunt Patricia, Dad's sister, called to tell me I was being heartless and ungrateful. Aunt Patricia, I said, did you help pay for my college? Well, no, but, did you buy me a house? Sarah, that's not the point, it is exactly the point. Everyone in this family thinks I should be grateful for parents who gave me nothing and now give them everything. I'm grateful for what I accomplished myself, but I don't owe anyone anything. The holidays that year were tense. I didn't attend Thanksgiving or Christmas, despite numerous calls and guilt trips. I heard through the grapevine that Dad had to take out a high-interest loan to keep his remaining shops afloat, and that Mom's real estate income had dropped significantly. In January, I got the call I'd been expecting. Sarah, it's Mom. We need to talk. About what? You know what. Your father's business is in real trouble. We might lose the house. This got my attention. Lose the house? We took out a second mortgage to help fund the shops, and now we can't make the payments. The bank is threatening foreclosure. I felt a mix of emotions, concern because I didn't actually want my parents to lose their home, and vindication, because this was exactly the kind of crisis they forced me to navigate alone. That's terrible, Mom. What are you going to do? We were hoping you might reconsider helping us. Have you asked Madison? Sarah, you know Madison can't help with this kind of money. Have you asked her? She and Jake are barely getting by as it is. Right. Because you've never required her to be financially independent. Because you've enabled her dependence on you for her entire adult life. Please, Sarah. We're desperate. I took a deep breath. Mom, I might be willing to help, but I have conditions. What kind of conditions? First, I want a formal apology for the way you treated me compared to Madison. Not just we are sorry you feel that way, but an actual acknowledgement that you showed blatant favoritism and that it was wrong. Sarah. Second, I want you to calculate exactly how much money you've given Madison over the years: college, apartment, car, wedding, house, ongoing support, and I want Madison to pay me back that amount before I give you a penny. That's impossible. Madison doesn't have that kind of money. Then she should get a job and start making payments. Just like I had to do. You're being unreasonable. I'm being exactly as reasonable as you were when I was 18 and desperate for help with college. Mom hung up on me. But the story doesn't end there. Over the next 3 months, my parents' financial situation became dire. Dad had to close another shop and was down to just 1 location. They were behind on their mortgage payments and facing foreclosure. Their retirement savings were depleted from trying to keep the businesses afloat. The decline had been gradual at first, but then accelerated rapidly. Dad's remaining auto shop was in an older part of town where many longtime customers had moved away or started using newer chain repair shops. The building needed significant maintenance that he couldn't afford, and several major pieces of equipment were breaking down. He was trying to compete with chain stores that could offer lower prices due to volume discounts on parts and supplies. Mom's real estate business was suffering too. The market had shifted toward online transactions and younger agents who were more tech-savvy. She was losing clients to realtors who offered virtual tours, professional photography, and social media marketing, services that required upfront investment she couldn't afford. Her commission checks were becoming smaller and less frequent. The irony wasn't lost on me that my parents were facing the same kind of financial pressure I'd lived with for years. They were learning what it felt like to worry about mortgage payments, to choose between necessary expenses, and to watch their options shrink as their financial situation deteriorated. But unlike me during my college and medical school years, they had built a lifestyle around having expendable income. They had a large house with a substantial mortgage, luxury car payments, and credit card debt from years of overspending. When their income dropped, they couldn't adjust their expenses quickly enough to match. I heard about their situation through bits and pieces of information from family members. My Aunt Patricia called to update me on Dad's business troubles, clearly hoping I'd volunteer to help. My cousin Jennifer mentioned during a casual phone conversation that Mom seemed stressed about money lately. Uncle Tom, Dad's business partner in his early years, told me he tried to offer Dad a loan but couldn't afford the amount Dad needed. The family gossip network was in full swing, with everyone discussing my parents' problems and speculating about solutions. What nobody wanted to say directly was that everyone thought I should step in and save them. During this time, something interesting happened with Madison. She finally got a reality check about her financial situation. With Connor getting older and more expensive, and Jake's seasonal work providing inconsistent income, she realized she needed to contribute more to their household finances. Jake's construction work had always been weather-dependent, and he'd typically make most of his money during spring and summer months, then struggled during winter when outdoor projects were limited. This feast or famine cycle had been manageable when my parents were helping with major expenses, but now they were on their own. Madison had never really understood how much things cost because she'd never been responsible for paying for them herself. When she started looking at their monthly expenses, the mortgage payment my parents had been covering, utilities, groceries, Connor's childcare, car payments, insurance, she was shocked at how quickly it all added up. I had no idea groceries cost so much, she told me during one of our increasingly frequent phone conversations. I mean, I knew they weren't free, but I never realized that feeding a family of 3 costs like $800 a month. This was a revelation that most people learn when they first move out of their parents' house. Madison was learning it at 25 with a husband and child to support. She got a job as a receptionist at a dental office, making $15 per hour. It wasn't much, but it was the first time she'd worked full-time since high school. The reality of earning her own money and seeing how little $15 an hour actually provided was eye-opening for her. "Sarah," she said during one of our conversations, "I don't understand how you lived on so little money for so many years. I'm working 40 hours a week and barely bringing home $2,000 a month after taxes and benefits. How did you pay for college and living expenses on less than that?" "I worked multiple jobs," I told her. "And I lived very cheaply. And I went into debt to cover what I couldn't afford." "Multiple jobs? When did you have time to study?" "I didn't have much free time. I studied late at night and on weekends. I didn't have a social life." For the first time, Madison seemed to understand what my college experience had actually been like. She'd always known intellectually that I'd worked my way through school, but she'd never grasped what that meant in practical terms. The dental office job was also Madison's first exposure to workplace expectations and professional responsibility. She'd never had a job where she couldn't call in sick whenever she felt like staying home, or where her performance was regularly evaluated. She'd never had to be somewhere at a specific time every day, dressed appropriately and ready to work regardless of how she felt. "My boss expects me to be there at 8 a.m. every day," she complained to me after her first week. "Even if Connor kept me up all night, or if Jake and I had a fight, or if I just don't feel like coming in." "Welcome to having a real job," I said, trying to keep the sarcasm out of my voice. "How do people do this for their whole lives? It's exhausting." I wanted to point out that most people start learning these lessons much earlier, but I held back. Madison was finally growing up, and I didn't want to discourage her progress by being too critical. The job did start to change her perspective, though. She began to appreciate Jake's work ethic in a way she never had before. She started to understand why he was tired after long days on construction sites, and why he was frustrated by their financial limitations. She also started to understand why I'd always seemed stressed and busy during my college and medical school years. Madison called me in March. "Sarah, I've been thinking about what you said about Mom and Dad helping me more than you." "Oh?" I got curious and added up everything they've given me over the years. The college money, the apartment, the car, the wedding, the house, all the ongoing support. "And?" "It's over $500,000. I never realized it was that much." I didn't say anything. I let that number sink in. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I didn't understand how unfair it was. I just assumed they helped you too and that you were being dramatic about it." "Madison, I appreciate you saying that, but an apology doesn't change the situation." "I know. And I want to try to make it right. I can't pay back $500,000, but I want to start contributing to help Mom and Dad." "What did you have in mind?" "Jake and I talked about it, and we want to sell the house." This surprised me. "Sell the house?" "We can't really afford to maintain it on our own anyway. The property taxes and utilities are more than Jake makes in 2 months. We were relying on Mom and Dad to help with those expenses, but now they can't." "Where would you live?" "We found a smaller place we can actually afford on our own. It's not as nice, but it's what we should have gotten in the first place. We figure we can give Mom and Dad whatever equity we get from the sale to help them save their house." I was genuinely impressed. This was the first time Madison had ever shown real maturity about financial responsibility. "Madison, that's actually really admirable. I should have done it years ago. I should have insisted on being independent instead of letting them support me. I see now how it hurt you, and I'm sorry." The house sold for $435,000. After paying off the remaining mortgage and selling costs, Madison and Jake netted about $180,000. They gave all of it to our parents to help them avoid foreclosure. My parents were able to use that money to get current on their mortgage and keep their house. Dad's remaining business was still struggling, but he was no longer facing immediate bankruptcy. When Mom called to tell me about Madison's sacrifice, I could hear the emotion in her voice. "Sarah, your sister sold her house to help us. I never expected that from her." "Maybe because you never expected anything from her before." "You're right. We were wrong, Sarah. About everything. We treated you unfairly, and we're sorry." "Are you sorry because you need my help now, or are you sorry because you realize what you did was wrong?" There was a long pause. "Both, I guess. But mostly because we realize we were wrong. Madison made us see that we'd enabled her and forced you to be independent when you needed support too." It was the closest thing to a real apology I'd gotten from either of my parents.